Now, when an artificial person comes into existence under a statute like cooperatives and companies, we have to understand that this is a situation which is different from the first situation which I referred to earlier. In the first situation which I referred to earlier, the purpose for which the concerned statutory corporation or body came into existence was a defined purpose. Here, the purpose will never be a defined purpose. It can be many purposes, all of which can never be enumerated in the statute concerned. Second thing is that the members can be specified. It can be laid down in greater detail how the concerned body can be governed. This is a situation which is different. There has to be a certain degree of flexibility which has to be given in this situation, rather than laying down in detail how these bodies how these artificial persons should govern themselves. But something has to be specified by the statute. First of all, it has to specify the provisions, it has to specify in what situations recognition should be given to the concerned artificial entity. So, it will lay down how the artificial and what should be satisfied when the artificial entity comes into existence. These have to be specified with a great degree of detail and certainty. Second, it has to provide for oversight by the authorities. When it has laid down the situations in which the artificial entity comes into existence, it has also to specify for oversight by the authorities. A statutory corporation is a different thing. Compared in that particular situation, it is answerable to the government, it is answerable to the law courts for the performance of its duties. But here, most of the times, the concerned cooperative or the company is not answerable to the government. It is not answerable to the law courts. It has a purpose, the purpose it has to fulfill, and it is answerable only to the members. The third type of a situation which this statute has to provide for is it has to recognize the different interests which are there in that particular entity and how to reconcile the different interests, or a mechanism by which the different interests should be reconciled. Now, what are the main interests which have to be reconciled in a company? The first interest which needs to be reconciled in a company is that of the shareholders vis-a-vis the creditors. The shareholders are the risk takers. The creditors have to be paid back, but the creditors would have greater interest in the paying back of their money than the shareholders have, who have got a limited liability if the company fails. The second type of interest which has to be reconciled, the second type of situation where the recognition of interest has to be done, is where one class of interest of one class of shareholders vis-a-vis the interest of another class of shareholders. The different classes of shareholders will have interests which clash with each other, and the company has to reconcile those interests. The different class of shareholders will not be only with regard to shareholders which have one type of rights, but shareholders who, because of their situation in that particular company, have a different, by themselves are a different class. Aspects which will have a bearing on the reconciliation of different interests in a company will also have to be taken into account. What type of a company are we dealing with? Whether it's a limited company or it's an unlimited company. The shareholders have got a greater responsibility to the creditors in the case of a limited company than in the case of an unlimited company. Whether it's a listed company or whether it's an unlisted company. In listed company, you have to treat it separately. whether it's a for-profit company or a not-for-profit company. Because you have to see that in a not-for-profit company, it's more like a public trust. And since it's more like a public trust, the government has got a greater say in its working, whether it's a for-profit company or a not-for-profit company. Because you have to understand that in a not-for-profit company, the company concerned is more like a public trust. Since it is more like a public trust, the limitations which are there on a trustee in the case of a public trust to a certain extent ought to also apply to a not-for-profit company. And there has to be a certain say which has to be given to the government in such a situation. Now, in a private company, usually it's more in the nature of a partnership. The shareholders, when the private company was incorporated, the shareholders were usually a party to it or derived their rights through that article, through the articles of association. When they derived rights through the articles of association, there was an opportunity which was provided to them to protect their rights. And many a times in the private company, the shareholder does have a role in the management. And since it has a role in the management, he can look into that particular company's management more carefully than a normal person. Since the shareholder has a role in the management, he is in the know of what the company is doing and how it will affect his interests. On the other hand, we take into account a listed public company. Listed public company is at the other end of the spectrum. The shareholder has not negotiated the articles of association in a listed public company. Since he has not negotiated the articles of association usually in a listed public company, the shareholder concerned does not have an opportunity to take measures to protect his rights from that of the majority. He does not have a role in the management, so there is a minimum knowledge which he has how the company is working and how it will affect his interests. Now, these two factors, the fact you have that in a private company, the shareholder has a role in the management, while in a listed public company, the shareholder does not have a management role, has not taken any measures so as to control, so as to protect his own rights. Therefore, the scope of rights which are being given to a shareholder in a private limited company and in a listed public company will be different. In a private limited company, the statute takes into account that the shareholder has an opportunity to protect his interests. While in a listed public company, that particular opportunity is usually not available. Since it is usually not available, the statute has to step in and provide for it. Now, in a similar vein, we have to look into the distinction between the different class of shareholders, the rights of a different class of shareholders.